So the growing needs of cybersecurity require us to monitor threats in real time. Today we're talking about security operations centers, and I'm joined here with Joshua Allen, who is a cybersecurity expert, over 10 years of experience in the field, specifically working as a security operations lead. Josh, thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, great to be here. This is an excellent topic to talk about. So let's get started.
So first and foremost, Josh, a little bit about you and your background as a security operations lead. Can you tell us about your experience in that field?
I am a lead in a security operations center. I have some past experience working in secure centers with the Department of Defense as well as the Department of State and the Executive Office. So a couple other government agencies in there as well. And before that, I was doing various levels of IT work that started with typically, working in a call center, sysadmin, up to becoming an information assurance manager, which is a security person within the DoD before I landed in my current role here.
Excellent. So first and foremost, for people who don't know, what is a security operations center or a SOC?
Yeah, so there's really two definitions of a SOC. I'll start with the basic definition. The basic definitions of a security operations center, a SOC, is a facility or a place or a department that houses all of or the primary core of your business's security operations. And by security operations, what we mean is incident response, detection, management in some cases, those things that we just talked about in the intro. Now, that's a classic SOC. The modern SOC is kind of different. Most of them you'll still find in a facility or a building, but it doesn't have to be quite that strict of a definition. There are now virtual SOCs, SOC as a service, something you actually subscribe to. With this pandemic age, we've found that you can run a SOC without a facility. You really just need the people. So it's mostly the team of security people whose sole aligned purpose is some kind of corporate or business security goal, generally to keep it secure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that purpose as we break into that area.
I'm wondering if you can discuss the different types of SOC models in depth.
So we'll start back kind of at the basics, which is the internal SOC, the corporate SOC. This is the one where you're probably a Fortune something company who has a large amount of aspects, a national or global presence, and you have a lot of information systems that you need to take care of. Something like that can be managed, but it can be difficult to find a managed SOC service that can handle something like that in the way that works best with your enterprise. Not to say it can't be done, but you have to shop around. But it's a lot easier to build an internal one, I think, personally. In that instance, it's very expensive, but it's gives you a lot more control. It keeps everything in-house, keeps all your data in-house, which a lot of people like to make sure that their data isn't going anywhere else. So your internal SOC is going to be a department or a floor in the corporate tower or whatever it is of these security experts that are going to fill a lot of different roles within the SOC. For an internal one, generally they're going to be managing the corporate network, and that's to include its whatever internet presence it has. And they may or may not also be working on the development and product type networks that reach out elsewhere. Their job, though, is to be the nerve center for security within the company. They are the managers of all the tools, and those tools, most of those tools have agents that are out deployed across the fleet. So they're making sure, one, that again, they have that visibility, continuing to ensure that as systems get installed that come online, that they can see them, that they can scan them, that they can inventory them, that they can do incident response on them and run the tools for security on them as they require. That's going to be a lot of the work going on in the SOC is maintaining all that kind of stuff, maintaining the tools, maintaining the visibility. So the next, so they're taking all this stuff from the corporate network, from some of the development, other networks, running it through the seam, and doing all these things we talked about. Um, creating that visibility, responding to those incidents, blocking things as need be, making sure that all the IPSs are updated, that they're working, making sure that all the systems in the corporate network are updated, and they have a lot of tools that give them these abilities. Things like SCCM for Windows, you can manage a lot of Windows systems through those. There's tons of malware systems that are out there. Corporate malware systems a lot of them have host or server based systems, so you can have this one big central security server and all the agents are deployed out across the fleet. They can call back to this main server, and that's how you can manage everything. So when I say it's a nerve center, it really does kind of function like a brain, where these are like the little dendrites out there where it can touch. The goals that they're going to be looking at is generally protecting what companies call the crown jewels, right? Their intellectual property, the IP. They're trying to make sure that people cannot access that, whatever it is that makes their business go. If it's a factory, it's the factory floor, it's the production lines. If it's a architecture shop, it's their blueprints, right? Those are the things that they're really trying to primarily protect. And the way that you protect that is securing everything else around them, which is the encompassing corporate network. Now, if you don't want to build all this because either you don't have the budget, you don't know how, or you're a smaller business that maybe just, this doesn't really make sense to have that many employees and tools as your nerve center, what you can do is you can offload that into a managed or SOC as a service. And it really functions the exact same way. The difference is it'll usually be a larger SOC because this is a company that's selling this as a service. So it can have more capacity than a corporate SOC, depending on how it's built. The other side is it's cheaper. You don't have to invest all that time into hiring people, all the money into buying the tools and hiring people and paying all those employees. It can definitely be a cheaper model. Now the difference comes into how that SOC gets its information and how it's able to do the things that it can do within your network when it's not somebody at your company. The typical model is to use appliances or agents, same kind of way, where you're building some kind of software or virtual machine or literally a physical, rack appliance that you slide into your server room and hook up to your network. And this is all calling back to some kind of main SOC that this company runs, and their employees have access to your information through these agents, through these appliances, and they're actually the ones who are going to be maintaining the signatures, protecting the systems from things through the IPS systems, doing breach investigation reports, responding to incidents. And it works kind of like, any other service. You've got a customer service number you can call. If it's an emergency because you're under attack, there's a button you can press to get through to somebody right away. They're all 24/7. It's pretty hectic. I can tell you from managing it from the inside that it is like a beehive. It is just constant activity. Um, Not always at the same spot. It kind of rolls around. There will be points in the day where half of the building feels like it's dead because nothing's really going on here, but then over there's some other kind of fire. But it just ebbs and flows, just like the internet does. You can just you're kind of tuned into it. It's really neat to be on that side of it, to be ingesting it. And so this is what we do is a managed SOC, and that is how we work. Is there's appliances out there. It's all connected into your system. we remotely access them and use the information on those tools to do the activities that a SOC does to keep you secure, to respond to incidents, as well as write the reports, keep the metrics. All very important stuff. Um, there is a way that I've seen, which is a co-managed SOC. It's not very common, but some of the enterprises that maybe want to offload a certain aspect of the job of a SOC, like perhaps they want to keep all their SIEM and stuff on site, but they don't want to write up all the reports and keep up to date on firewall signatures, right? So they'll they'll have maybe they'll have like a WAF, and they'll have some kind of agent in there that's an IDS, but then the SIEM and all that will be internal. And so the internal employees will work on all the data mining in Splunk or whatever tool that they're using. And then anything that deals with their other attack surface, their web attack surface, will be offloaded to this SOC as a service. So that's kind of a co-managed one. That's one of the ways they can go. It's, like I said, not very common, but I have seen it. And then they have this idea of a global SOC, which sounds kind of weird because how can you have a global SOC? But this is really more for, this is something that the military has, right? It's usually governments and stuff. And this is, a global SOC is really just a series of SOCs around the globe, around the country, that are all treated rather as individual facilities, as nodes of a single major SOC. So they kind of follow the sun of security. Just things get passed down the line throughout the day, and there's always somebody connected in every part of the world. And the advantages of that is, rather than having to have everything kind of come into one or two locations geographically, you can have your security experts sitting on top of the traffic wherever it is in the world, managing it in as close to real time as you can possibly get. Super expensive, which is why it's generally only something you'd see with governments, but there are some very major corporations who could afford to do something like that as well. But those are the pretty much all the type of SOCs, really. But
Mm-hmm.
things are changing
Yeah.
as it is, so we used to never have anything like a managed SOC. You used to only ever see the internal SOC. That's all there ever was. So it's very interesting to see where it's going to go in the future of that.
And in your experience, what are the primary benefits of a SOC for an organization?
Having a SOC, a mature and properly configured SOC, keeps you agile in the security sense, keeps you, if not ahead of the game, at least in the game of security. And it also helps containerize the management of all that into one place so that it's not kind of spread out against your whole organization. The main point is centralizing your assets, especially your security assets, and really centralizing the management of that security for your organization if it's an internally managed SOC. That's a classical use of a SOC. If you're a big business company and you need to make sure that you're secure, you have a SOC to do incident response, to monitor the fleet, to be the main point of contact for a lot of these audits, security scans, pen tests, things like that. Collaboration across departments to make sure that everybody is secure. You need somebody to be kind of the coach or the footman to bring everyone together across all departments, because a lot of departments, silo, especially in these really huge organizations. It's also their job to keep metrics of the security landscape within the organization, report that up to the CISO, the CIO, the CFO. There's a lot of monetary implications of risk. You can quantify risk in dollars, because a ransomware attack, we know generally how much one of those could cost. Any good company knows the worth of their intellectual property. So if that were to be attacked, you can put a dollar amount to that kind of a breach. So it's also their job to make sure that they're reporting the pertinent information to those big decision makers at the C-suite, maximizing the awareness, helping the company keep the cost down, even though a lot of places will argue that the IT department's going to cost you money. It's true, there is an investment in that, but the reality is it's always cheaper to run an IT department than it is to pay to have your, you know, encrypted assets unlocked.
So, this is obviously not a small investment, and smaller mid-sized businesses probably don't invest in SOCs as much. So when do you find there's a need to have a SOC for an organization?
So really I'm just going to start by answering that question of more and more every day, everyone needs the functions that a SOC can provide. And I say it that way because you may not necessarily get it from a SOC. You can still get this through other means, but it typically requires a lot of your own management. This is where SOC as a service comes in, especially with the medium and small business models. It's cheaper to just pay a subscription, pay some setup fees, than it is to hire a whole department of employees, as well as buy all the tools that they need, subscribe to everything else that they need. Whereas that's really been taken care of by a third party in these managed SOCs and managed services. So you can save a lot by subscribing to them. When you need a SOC is every day. It's not really something you should do as a reaction. If you're saying, hey, we should get a SOC after you've been breached, obviously it's too late. It's something you should definitely do. But the answer is if you do a lot of business, and you have a large web presence, if most of your shop, for example, is online, it would be a good idea to have access to most of, if not all of, what a SOC can provide you. And that's where the managed services come in for the smaller companies. Really big enterprises, multi-thousand employee enterprises, typically don't subscribe to a third-party SOC, generally because the overhead of the deployment needed to cover that organization is going to be so expensive and so cumbersome that it actually ends up being easier to build a SOC internally. So it's the simple answer is always the more truthful answer is that it kind of depends, right? It has to be worth it. First of all, you have to have the web presence and have a lot of your business risk out there on the internet, or at least in your information systems that you have within your company. You don't necessarily have to always be on the internet, but when you have a large attack surface, you need a SOC to be able to react to it.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about some of the components of a SOC. I'm wondering if we can dive into this a little bit more and discuss how does a SOC actually work?
Absolutely. So a SOC's main purpose is the identification and reaction to threats. A SOC needs to be able to see what's going on in the information systems that they intend to protect. That's really the most important thing. If you can't see it, you can't protect it, you can't react to it. Second, most important thing after the visibility is understanding the goal. I don't put that first because I really think visibility is the most important thing. Even if you don't have a goal, at least if you can see what's going on, you're doing something right. But the goal is a really important part of creating, designing, or subscribing to, or deciding if you need a SOC is what is that SOC going to do? A simple answer is will keep us secure, but you need to break down a little bit more into that of, well, how, right? Is the idea to block stuff? Is the idea to monitor systems? And which systems are they monitoring? Are we trying to keep ingress from the internet domain from happening? Are we trying to protect our internal corporate systems? Are we trying to look at both? Or if you're a company who serves a SOC as a service, then the questions you need to ask is, who are we servicing? Who are we selling to? How big of clients do we want to manage? How big of clients do we want to subscribe to us? Defining all those kind of limits. These are the kind of things that you have to figure out in your goal of a SOC as your step two. So I guess 1 and 2 can kind of switch off depending. If you're a managed service, you need to know the goal. If you are an internal SOC, you need to take inventory of everything you have, figure it out, and then decide what you're going to do with it. From there, you need to equip yourself with the tools to do whatever the goal is. Basic level 1 is monitoring and identification. So for that, you're going to need some kind of monitoring system, like an IDS, an intrusion detection system. That could be one that sits on the network, looking at the enterprise assets internally, or it could be an IDS that is sitting between internet traffic and your web servers to see what's going on from the internet zone inward. That gives you the visibility, but you also need somewhere to see that information, sort through that information, understand that information. That's where a SIEM comes in, a security information and event management system, which is kind of a mouthful, but Splunk is a good example of this. Elasticsearch, another good example of this. You can build a number of different types of SIMs. There's plenty of them out there, but they all generally serve the same purpose of ingesting all that information from some kind of log source like an IDS and giving analysts and security experts the ability to run searches, filter results, generally looking for threats and things like that. So that gives you your very basic thing. You can run a SOC with that. It just looking at stuff, digging through. Although some would argue that that's not really a SOC because a SOC should really be reacting to it, not just monitoring it. But you can have a monitor-only SOC if that's all you really think that you need in your business. Now, the next step, they need to be able to do something with that. So it could be as basic as blocking IPs from some bad source. So they're going to need firewalls, an intrusion prevention system of some kind, IPS. Now, this is where it can really get advanced to SOCs, and this is where it generally does get very advanced to SOCs, is most of perimeter tools now go way beyond just a firewall in your traditional sense. If you're in a cloud service especially, there are all kinds of application gateways, API connectors, cloud tools, just numerous different ways that traffic can enter your environment. And there's numerous different ways that you can protect that traffic coming in through there. So if you're trying to block it, you need to be able to communicate with these tools in some way. A lot of SOCs will use a tool that sits in an environment that can speak to all these configurations or build AWS, for example, configs or Azure configurations for themselves to act as a firewall would, blocking these things. So that's your first kind of layer of response. Now, that's really basic, and these days they're doing so much more than that because there's also threat intelligence, there's dynamic data science coming into play here so that they can continuously update all these signatures and keep on top of it. And that's a really important part of what a SOC does and how it works is it is constantly moving. Your SOC should never be quiet because the internet's never quiet. The network's never really quiet. If your network is quiet, you don't need a SOC. I guess it's kind of back to that question of when do you need one? It's when you're doing network business. We've got our visibility, we've got our goal, we've got some way to monitor it, we've got a tool to keep logs of those things, we've got an intrusion prevention system to begin actually trying to block and prevent. Then there's another important layer there, which is respond. Sometimes things don't get blocked. A lot of times things don't get blocked. Sometimes people get breached. A SOC's job should also be to respond to breaches, doing breach investigations, incident response, going down the entire cyber kill chain, investigating. It may even include digital forensics, right? So they're also doing that tail end aspect of when something does go wrong, they're finding out what happened, they're finding out the impact, they're giving a report to those who need to know what, like we talked about earlier, the CISO, the CIO, the CFO, the CEO, they need to know what happens within their business. They have to write risk reports. All that stuff's going on. That's your daily work, your actual hands-on work. There's another very important aspect, and that is the reporting everything coming out of there. So making making sure that the people who are decision makers in the business are aware of what is happening, aware of their current running risk, aware of what that risk is quantified as in terms of dollars, in terms of production time, whatever it happens to be, based on what kind of business it is. Building those metrics and generally trying to drive the company towards some kind of corporate security goals as well that are ever moving so that they can become more secure and keep ahead of it. So all that falls within a SOC's purview. But that about
Excellent.
covers.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
That comprehensive overview. What are the best practices for running a SOC?
Best practices for running a SOC. So it kind of goes back to, what do you need to run a SOC? Number one, visibility. Make sure your SOC can always see everything. A big part of that is inventory. Inventory all of your software, all of your IT systems within your enterprise, not just for the SOC, but for the system admins, for auditing. There are so many reasons why you need to do that. It is extremely important. So make sure you are always inventorying, because if you can't see it, you can't protect it. And if you don't know it's there, you can't put all your visibility tools on it. So you got to take that inventory. You need to make, and so that's like the scope. You need to make sure that your SOC has as much scope as possible. The wider you cast, there are shields. The bigger the shield, the more protection you have. So you got to make sure that you cover the entire scope of what you're trying to protect with your goals here. So another best practice is your data flow. Your SOC needs a good data stream. They have to be able to see what's going in. It's part of the visibility, but you have to make sure that the tools can support that. Make sure your network can support that. You've got to have network configurations to get all this stuff through to the Splunk servers, or especially if you're using a managed service and you're sending things out, now you have to worry about encrypted, secure external connections to send all of your data, all of your logs outward. Usually it's from that appliance. And then the next one is, enforce analysis. Don't just react. Reacting is not even half the game. It's like an eighth of the game. It's great if you react, but to really truly understand what's going on, so you need to make sure that your team is analyzing everything. That's why we call them analysts. That's what their job is to do, because you can find that some small little problems can be clues to a much larger threat that's happening, especially when we're talking about these APT groups. They're not going to be very obvious. They're going to be very subtle. And so you have to do the analysis if you're trying to catch things like APTs, especially if you're a multinational corporation who is a target for them. So your SOC needs to make sure that they're analyzing and understanding your security posture every day. And I think another great best practice, and I'll leave it off on this one because beyond here gets a little bit nebulous depending on what you're trying to do, but automation. Introduce automation into your SOC, because the more tasks you can automate, the more time your people can spend analyzing and using their human brain. That's why you have them. The tools are going to do the job of grabbing all the stuff and blocking the things, but you hire the people for their brains. So automate menial tasks so that they can use their brains. That's a huge one for a SOC.
Excellent. Thank you for covering that. Josh, is there any other aspects of a SOC that you wanted to address or include in this?
No, I think, just remembering that a SOC is there to serve a specific need, and it has to fit the business model. So it will require some sit down and evaluation to decide if you do need a SOC. And then there's going to be some decision on what kind you can afford to run, what kind you can afford to set up, whether it's internal or managed, co-managed. And then make sure that whatever you decide to do, that it has the tools, it has the people, and it's following those best practices, that they're analyzing, that they're automating, that they're inventorying, and that they're ingesting all of the information.
Perfect. Well, Josh, thank you so much for your time. And if people want to reach out to you, what would be the best way to get in touch?
That would be Joshua at purplesec.us.
Excellent. Thank you so much again.